At the foot of misty green hills, there lay a small village nestled beside a gentle river, flowing through fields of golden paddy. Every morning, the sound of bells from an ancient temple would blend with the songs of birds and the soft whisper of the wind. The villagers lived simply, closely connected to the land and guided by their belief in destiny. In that village, there was a poor farmer who lived with his family in a modest mud house. Despite the hardships, he remained calm and composed, his eyes deep and thoughtful, as though he understood truths that time itself had yet to reveal. One afternoon, as the sun painted the fields in shades of red and the breeze carried the scent of damp earth after harvest, a group of strangers entered the village. At their head was a wealthy merchant, riding a white horse, his silk cloak fluttering gently in the wind. News spread quickly, and the villagers gathered, their eyes filled with curiosity and admiration. As they passed by the farmer's small field, the merchant suddenly stopped. His gaze rested on a strong buffalo quietly pulling the plow. After a few polite inquiries, he offered to buy the buffalo for an amount of gold, enough for the farmer's family to live comfortably for many years. The villagers buzzed with excitement. Some whispered, "This is a chance to change his life." Others said, "He would be foolish to refuse." All waited eagerly for his answer. The farmer remained silent for a moment, gently stroking the buffalo's back as if speaking to an old friend. Then he lifted his head and replied in a calm, steady voice, "Sir, this buffalo is not merely property. It is a part of my family's life. Some things cannot be exchanged for gold." The merchant was surprised and even increased his offer. But the farmer still shook his head gently. In the end, the group departed, leaving behind the villagers' disappointment. They shook their heads, believing he had missed a rare opportunity. But the farmer offered no explanation. He simply returned to his unfinished work, as though nothing unusual had happened. Before continuing to plow, he murmured softly, as if speaking to himself, "Who can say what is fortune and what is misfortune? Only time will tell." A few days later, while the early morning mist still veiled the fields and dewdrops clung to the rice leaves, sparkling in the light of dawn, something unexpected happened. The farmer's son went out to the buffalo shed as usual, but suddenly froze. The rope was broken, the wooden gate slightly ajar, and the buffalo, the family's loyal companion, was gone. The news spread quickly throughout the village. People gathered in front of his house, shaking their heads in sympathy. Some spoke softly, yet loud enough for all to hear. If he had sold the buffalo that day, he wouldn't have lost everything like this. Others sighed. Fate plays cruel games. An opportunity came, and he let it slip away. The son, worried, ran across the fields, along the riverbanks, calling out for the buffalo in vain. The entire day passed without a trace. As the sun set behind the distant hills, he returned home, his eyes weary and his heart heavy with sorrow. Meanwhile, the farmer sat quietly on the porch, his expression as calm as a still lake. The son sat beside him, his voice filled with despair. "Father, we have lost everything." The farmer placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice deep and gentle, like the wind. "Loss or gain, my son, no one can truly know at this moment. What we call a loss today may carry something we have yet to see." The villagers continued whispering behind them, but he did not respond. He simply looked up at the sky, now turning a deep shade of purple, and softly said, as if speaking to the endless expanse, "Who can say what is fortune and what is misfortune? Only time will tell." About a week later, as the seasonal winds swept through the village carrying the dry heat of the earth and the scent of scorched grass, a strange sound arose from the distant fields. It was the pounding of hooves, strong, rapid, and urgent. The farmer's son, who had been sitting by the porch, suddenly sprang to his feet and looked toward the foot of the hill. From within the hazy cloud of dust, a familiar figure emerged. It was their buffalo. It ran toward the house, healthy and unharmed, its eyes bright and body strong. But what astonished everyone even more was that behind it were two wild buffaloes, large and powerful, as if they had followed it back. The whole village was in an uproar. People rushed out to see, murmuring excitedly, "Not only did he get his buffalo back, but now he has two more," one exclaimed. The same eyes that once judged him now turned to admiration and envy. Someone laughed loudly. What a blessing from the heavens! The son was overjoyed. He ran forward and embraced the buffalo's neck as if reuniting with a loved one after a long separation. Turning to his father, his face glowing with excitement, he said, "See, Father, everything has turned out well in the end." But the farmer only smiled gently. He looked at the buffaloes standing in the yard, then said calmly, "Do not rush to call this good fortune. My son, what comes today may not carry the meaning we think." Once again, the villagers did not understand, but he offered no further explanation. Quietly, he fetched more ropes and prepared the shed, as if welcoming something only he could foresee, that every blessing may carry within it a challenge yet to come. The joy had barely settled when a trial quietly arrived. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the banyan trees, the son eagerly led one of the two wild buffaloes out to train it for plowing. The animal was large and powerful, but its eyes still held a wild, untamed spirit, unaccustomed to reins and human touch. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. The plow carved straight lines into the earth, and the son smiled with pride. But in a sudden moment, as a strong gust of wind rustled the leaves, the buffalo panicked. It let out a loud bellow, jerked violently against the reins, and bolted like a storm. Before the son could let go, he was dragged to the ground. The buffalo stepped on his leg and then charged off into the field. A cry of pain rang out, tearing through the quiet morning air. Once again, the villagers gathered. Some ran to fetch the healer, while others stood nearby, shaking their heads in chinta. After examining him, the healer said that the boy's leg was badly broken. It would take months to heal, and he might never walk normally again. The whispers began again. "See, what blessing is this? It only brought misfortune. Gaining more buffaloes, only to end up like this." The son lay on his bed, his face pale with pain. He looked at his father and asked weakly, "Father, is this what you meant by something good?" The farmer sat beside him, his gaze as calm as ever. Gently holding his son's hand, he said slowly, "My son, what happens today may cause us pain, but do not rush to call it misfortune. There are things whose true meaning we only understand with time." Outside, the buffaloes stood quietly under the sun. No one knew that this very incident was silently opening a path that none in the village could yet see. Just 2 weeks later, as the hot winds began carrying red dust from the north, a strange sound echoed throughout the village, the pounding of drums. heavy and relentless, as if foretelling misfortune. From afar, a troop of the king's soldiers marched in, their armor gleaming under the sun, their faces stern and unyielding. The villagers gathered in panic at the village square. The commander unrolled a decree, his voice booming like thunder. War has broken out at the northern border. All able-bodied young men in the village must immediately join the army. This is the king's Adesh. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Mothers clutched their sons tightly. Fathers stood still with anxious eyes. One by one, the young men were called, forced to leave their families amid tears and choked cries. When the soldiers arrived at the farmer's house, they saw the son lying on the bed, his leg in a cast, unable to move. One soldier shook his head and said, "This one is useless for the battlefield." They turned and left without another word. The son lay there, listening to the fading footsteps, a strange feeling rising within him. Outside, his friends were being taken away, perhaps to a place from which they would never return. The entire village sank into sorrow. Cries echoed through the night, blending with the howling wind sweeping past the thatched roofs. No one spoke any more of buffaloes or fortune. Only fear and loss remained. The farmer still sat quietly on the porch, gazing toward the road where the soldiers had passed. He was neither happy nor sad. Softly, as if whispering to the heavens and the earth, he said, "Whatever comes carries its own reason." Time passed, and the war lasted far longer than anyone had imagined. The winds from the north no longer carried red dust, they brought grim news instead. Groups of men began to return, but not in the numbers that had left. Some came back on crutches, some bore lasting wounds, and some never returned at all. In the village, laughter slowly faded away. Houses that were once filled with light sank into silence. Mothers sat by their doorways, their weary eyes waiting for figures that would never appear again. Grief spread like a dark cloud, covering the entire sky. The farmer's son, now able to sit up, quietly observed everything. He looked at his friends, those who had once plowed the fields, and laughed beside him, now either gone forever or returned with wounds that would never heal. One evening, as the sunset painted the river red, he turned to his father, his voice subdued. "If I hadn't broken my leg that day, perhaps I would have gone too, and maybe I wouldn't be here anymore." The farmer did not answer immediately. He gazed out at the fields, where the buffaloes grazed peacefully, then nodded gently. There are things that, when they happen, seem like misfortune, yet they may be protecting us from greater things we cannot see. The son lowered his head, his eyes slowly filling with understanding. The pain he once resented had now become the reason he was still alive. In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Loss, fortune, pain, and life itself. As if life were never random, but quietly guiding each person through its winding paths, whose true meaning can only be understood when we look back. In the days that followed, the village was no longer as noisy as before. The hurried judgments and easy laughter at others' misfortunes faded away. In their place was a quiet stillness, as if each person was reflecting on all that had happened. The villagers began to look at the farmer differently, no longer with doubt or mockery, but with a mix of respect and curiosity. They recalled everything from the day he refused the gold, to losing the buffalo, then gaining more, and even his son's accident. Each event they had once judged so quickly now seemed to hold a deeper meaning. One afternoon, A few villagers came and sat by his porch. They spoke less than before, sitting in silence for a long while. Finally, one of them said slowly, "Perhaps we were wrong to think we understood everything." The farmer simply smiled gently, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. He poured tea and handed it to each of them, just as he always did. Another asked, "How can you remain so calm when everything keeps changing?" He looked out at the fields, where the golden light of sunset spread warmly across the land, and replied, "When we understand that we cannot see the whole path, we learn to walk without rushing to conclusions." From that day on, the villagers no longer hurried to label things as fortune or misfortune. They began to slow down and listen to life more carefully. One evening, as the sky shimmered with countless stars and a cool breeze from the river drifted across the quiet fields, the farmer sat with his son beneath an ancient tree behind their house. The world was still, filled only with the soft sounds of insects and the steady breath of nature. The son looked at his father, his eyes no longer clouded with confusion. He spoke softly, "Now I understand. Not everything that happens can be judged right away." The farmer smiled, his voice deep and unhurried. "People often want immediate answers, but life does not work that way. It is like a seed planted in the soil. We cannot dig it up every day to see whether it has sprouted." He looked up at the sky, then continued, "What matters is not what happens, but how we receive it. In times of ease, do not become arrogant. In times of hardship, do not rush into despair. Everything is following its own path." The son remained silent, but within him, clarity began to grow. And in the stillness of that night, the father's simple yet profound words seemed to sink into the earth, into the wind, and into the very course of the boy's life.